was my grandson's 7th birthday, and my daughter-in-law looked me dead in the eye across the kitchen table and said, "You need to stop inserting yourself into our family decisions. We don't need your input." I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I said, "All right," picked up my coat from the chair, kissed my grandson on the top of his head, and drove home in the dark. That was March. By June, she had tried to access my grandchildren's education trust, the one I'd spent 11 years quietly building, and found out that 3 weeks after that birthday party, I had already been to see my notary. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is not important. What matters is this: I am 68 years old. I spent 34 years as a nurse at a hospital in Mississauga. I raised 2 children mostly on my own after my husband passed from a heart attack when our son was 12 and our daughter was 9. I did not do any of this asking for praise. You do what needs doing. That's what my mother taught me, and that's what I believed. My son, I'll call him my son because that's what he is, the center of so much of this story, is 41 years old. He works in commercial real estate. He is a good man who, for the past 6 years, has been married to a woman I will call my daughter-in-law, because that is her role in this, even if it never quite felt like a relationship. Her name is Renata. She came into my son's life quickly, the way some people do. Confident, well-dressed, decisive. At first I thought those were good qualities. I still think they can be. But there is a difference between being decisive and deciding that everyone around you needs to fall in line with whatever you've decided. I noticed it in small things at the beginning, the way she'd speak over my son at dinner, the way she'd answer questions directed at him. Once, I asked him whether he'd looked into a financial advisor for the RESPs I wanted to start for the children, and she answered before he'd even opened his mouth. "We have a plan," she said. "We're handling it." I smiled and nodded. I was not handling it. She was, in her mind, and my son sat there like a man who had learned that certain conversations were not worth the cost of having them. I have 2 grandchildren. A boy, 7 at the time of that birthday party, and a girl who had just turned 4. They are the reason I got up some mornings. After my son's father died, I poured myself into work and into raising the kids, and when those children grew up and had their own children, something in me softened in a way I hadn't expected. I would drive out to their house in Burlington on Saturdays, and we would bake or do puzzles, or I'd take the boy to the park while the baby napped. Those were good hours, clean hours. Renata tolerated it, I think, for the first couple of years. Then something shifted. I don't know exactly what. My guess, and I've had a lot of time to think about it, is that the children started to love me in a way that was visible, in a way she couldn't control. My grandson would run to the door when I arrived. My granddaughter had a name for me, her own made-up version of the word for grandmother that she'd invented herself, and she used it constantly, delighted with it. I think that bothered Renata. I think she wanted to be the center of everything in that house, and I was a thread that ran outside of her reach. The comments started around year 3 of the marriage. I'd bring something over for the children, a book, a little toy I'd found at a shop in Port Credit, and she'd say something like, "You know, we're trying to limit screens," even though the toy had nothing to do with the screen. Or I'd suggest something for the boy's persistent cough. I was a nurse. I had opinions about croup and cold air, and she'd say, "We're following our pediatrician's advice," as if I'd asked her to go against medical counsel, as if I'd said anything at all. I learned to say less, but saying less didn't help, because the problem was never really what I said. The problem was that I existed, and I had a relationship with those children that didn't require her permission. My son called me one evening in February, a few weeks before the birthday party, and he sounded the way he sounds when he's trying to have a difficult conversation without actually having it. Talking around the edges of something. He said Renata felt that I was overstepping by setting up the RSPs without consulting them. I had opened registered education savings plans for both grandchildren the previous spring, named them both as beneficiaries, myself as the subscriber, and contributed regularly. Under Canadian law, a grandparent can do this. The money grows tax-sheltered. The government adds the Canada Education Savings Grant on top. I'd done the same for my daughter's children years earlier, and no one had said a word. I told my son that I understood and that I would be happy to discuss the accounts with him directly any time. He said he passed that along. He didn't call back. The birthday party was 2 weekends later. I brought the boy a book about trains and a card with $50 in it. He was so happy he climbed into my lap and stayed there for 20 minutes while the other children ran around the backyard. That was the moment, I think. Renata walked through the kitchen and saw him curled against me, and something crossed her face that I still think about. After the other guests left, after the cake, after the presents had been opened and the grandchildren were occupied with a cousin in the other room, Renata came and stood at the kitchen table where I was sitting with my tea, and she said it. You need to stop inserting yourself into our family decisions. We don't need your input. I asked her what specifically she meant. She said I had gone behind their backs with the RSPs. She said I undermined her parenting by offering advice. She said the children were becoming confused about boundaries because I was always there. I thought about all the Saturdays, the puzzles, the park, the baking. All right, I said. I kissed my grandson on the head. I got my coat. I drove home on the QEW with the radio off, and I thought very clearly, the way I used to think clearly, on a difficult night shift when someone's pressure was dropping, and I had to make fast decisions. What matters here? What can I control? And what needs to happen right now before the window closes? By the time I got home to my house in Mississauga, I knew what I needed to do. I called my notary the next morning. Her name is a woman I have known for 15 years, careful and thorough and not given to drama. I told her I needed to restructure both ReSpark accounts and add specific subscriber succession terms. I also told her I wanted to review whether a family trust structure made sense for the larger amount I'd been setting aside, money beyond the RSPs, savings I'd been quietly accumulating since my husband died, and that I had always intended for the grandchildren. She asked me what I was concerned about. I told her I was concerned that if something happened to me, or if I was pushed out of the picture before the children were old enough to make their own choices, someone else might get access to what I built for them. She said, let's make sure that can't happen. We met the following Thursday. I did not tell my son. I did not tell anyone. Here is what I want people to understand about this part. I was not being vengeful. I was not trying to punish anyone. I was a grandmother who had watched over 3 years a slow and deliberate erosion of her relationship with her grandchildren, and I was taking the only kind of action that I knew would hold. Not an argument, not a confrontation, not a letter, a legal structure, something that didn't require anyone's cooperation to work. We restructured the RESPs so that successor subscriber rights would pass to my daughter, not to my son's household, in the event of my death. The money would still go to the grandchildren for their education, but Renata would have no path to it through my son. The family trust was more involved. My notary worked with a lawyer she trusted. A man who had done estate planning for 30 years and who sat across from me at a boardroom table in a small office off Hurontario Street and explained my options without ever once being condescending about it. I left that meeting with a clear plan. The trust would be discretionary. I would be the trustee. The beneficiaries were my grandchildren. Access to the funds would vest at age 25. And there was a clause, not punitive, just clarifying, that the trustee had the right to take into account the nature and quality of the beneficiary's relationship with extended family when making distributions before the vesting age. In plain language, if my grandchildren were being kept from knowing me, that would be a factor. My lawyer told me it was unusual but entirely legal. He said some people put conditions like this in trusts and others didn't, and that the enforceability depended on the wording. He was careful. So was I. I signed everything in April. The total value between the RSPs and the trust was significant. I will not say the number because it's not about the number. It's about the fact that it was real and it was mine to give, and I had made a decision about how it would be given. I went home and I watered my garden, and I did not mention it to anyone. The spring passed. I did not call my son. He did not call me. I sent cards to the grandchildren on Easter, one with a small chocolate bunny, one with a little stuffed rabbit, both mailed to the house, and I received no acknowledgement. I don't know if they received them. I don't know if they were given to the children. That part was hard. I won't pretend it wasn't. I have a friend, a woman I trained with at Trillium in the 90s. One of those friendships that has lasted because we are honest with each other in the way you can only be with someone who has seen you at your worst and your most exhausted. And she was the only person I talked to during those months. She'd come over on Sunday afternoons and we'd have tea on the back porch, and she'd let me say the hard things. That I missed my grandson's voice. That I thought about my granddaughter every single day. That I wondered whether I had done the right thing by saying, "all right," instead of fighting back in that kitchen. She told me, one afternoon in May, that the bravest thing I had ever done was choose a slow strategy over a fast one when my heart was breaking. I think she was right, but it didn't feel brave. It felt like grief. In June, something happened that I only found out about later through my son. Renata had apparently decided that the Resbuck counts were a joint family asset, that because they were for her children, she had some right to direct how they were managed or potentially redirected. I don't know exactly what she believed was possible. Perhaps she thought she could be added to the account. Perhaps she thought she could pressure me into closing it and handing the funds over differently. What I know is that she contacted the financial institution where the accounts were held and inquired about making changes. She was told that only the subscriber, me, had authority over the accounts, that nothing could be changed without my consent and authorization, that she had no standing in the matter. She apparently tried a second time, asking to speak with a supervisor. The answer was the same. I found out because the institution flagged the inquiries and a representative called me to let me know, as a courtesy, that there had been 2 attempts to inquire about the accounts by someone who was not listed on them. They could not tell me who, but I knew. I called my lawyer. He said the inquiries were not legally actionable in any meaningful way. She hadn't done anything illegal. She'd just asked questions and been told no, but that it confirmed the importance of the structures we had put in place. She ran into the wall, he said, and the wall held. I sat in my kitchen, and I let out a breath that I think I had been holding since March. My son called me 3 days later. It was a Thursday evening in late June, and I was making dinner. Salmon with roasted potatoes, something simple, when my phone rang and it was him. He sounded different. Not the hedging, circling voice from February. He sounded like someone who had recently seen something clearly that they had been avoiding looking at. He said, "Mom, I need to talk to you." I turned the burner down and I sat at the table with my phone. He told me that Renata had told him she'd tried to make changes to the education accounts. He had not known she was going to do that. He said he'd told her that was not something she should have done, and the conversation they'd had afterward was, and here he paused a long time, a hard one. He asked me if I was okay. I told him I was fine. I asked him how the children were. He said they asked about me. He said my grandson had been asking why I hadn't come on Saturdays lately. I am not a woman who cries easily. I have held the hands of dying patients and kept my voice steady, but I had to put the phone down on the table for a moment and look out the window at my backyard before I could answer. "I'd like to see them," I said, "if that's possible." He came the following Saturday, just him and the children. No Renata. They arrived at 11 in the morning, and my grandson came through the door and ran to me exactly the way he always had, and my granddaughter did that thing where she buries her face in my shoulder and pats my back, like I'm the one who needs comforting. We baked butter tarts. We went to the park. My son and I sat at the kitchen table after the children were settled with a movie in the living room, and we talked in the way we hadn't talked in years. Not about Renata, not about the trust, just about things that mattered. His father. The hospital, what I'd been growing in the garden, what the boy was interested in these days. Before he left, he said, "I don't fully understand everything you set up, but I trust that you did it for the right reasons." I told him I had. I told him the money would be there for his children no matter what happened, no matter what anyone did, and that was all I had ever wanted. He hugged me at the door for a long time. The drive back to Burlington. I know he made it. I imagine he made it in the particular silence of a man sorting through difficult things. That drive is his story, not mine. Mine ended at the door. I went back inside and cleaned up the baking dishes and stood at the kitchen window for a while, watching the light go gold across the backyard. 68 years old, still standing, still here. The trust is still in place. The RASPs are still growing. The government grant comes in every year, steady and reliable, accumulating quietly for 2 children who don't yet know it exists. When they're 25, or when they need it for school, it will be there. All of it. Every year I contributed. Every Saturday at the park, every butter tart, every puzzle, every hour I chose to show up. It will be there, in some form that lasts. That is what I want people to understand. If they take anything from what I've told you, love without structure is vulnerable. I loved those children completely, and I also protected them practically, and those 2 things were never in conflict. The woman who baked with them and the woman who sat across from a lawyer on here Ontario Street were the same woman. I am still their grandmother. Nothing that happened this year changed that. Nothing ever will. I've thought about that drive home from Burlington more times than I can count. The QEW at night, the radio off, the particular quiet of a decision that hasn't been made yet but is already forming somewhere just below conscious thought. I wasn't angry exactly. I was clear. And I've learned over 68 years that clarity is more useful than anger almost every time. What happened in that kitchen? Renata standing over me with her arms crossed, saying the words she said, was not the beginning of anything. It was the end of a long patience I had been extending without realizing how much it was costing me. There is a kind of person who mistakes your restraint for weakness, your silence for agreement, your kindness for something that can be managed and redirected. I had watched that happen slowly, over years, and I had kept showing up anyway, baking butter tarts, driving to the park, sending Easter cards, because the children deserved consistency from someone. But there is a point where showing up with nothing behind it stops being love and starts being something closer to surrender. I don't think what I did was clever exactly. I think it was just honest. I knew what I had built. I knew what it was for. And I knew that if I didn't protect it with the same seriousness I had used to build it, it would become a tool in someone else's hands, used not for the children, but against the relationship I had with them. That's the thing about doing right by people. It is not enough to mean well. Meaning well without structure, without follow-through, without the willingness to protect what you've given. That is a kind of laziness dressed up as generosity. The money in those accounts didn't accumulate because I wished hard enough. It accumulated because I made a decision every year and kept it. The trust didn't hold because I hoped it would. It held because I sat across from a lawyer and did the work. My son said before he left that Saturday that he trusted I had done it for the right reasons. I have turned that sentence over many times. Trust given after the fact, after the evidence is in that, is not blind faith. That is something harder to earn and more worth having. He saw what happened when Renata went to that institution and was turned away. He saw what the structure I had built actually looked like from the outside, and he drew his own conclusions. I think that is how things change in families. Not through confrontations, not through ultimatums, not through anyone winning an argument loudly enough. Through the patient accumulation of evidence that someone loves you and meant it well enough to back it up with action. My granddaughter still uses that name she invented for me. She said it at the door when they arrived, ran it together with a hug so that the word and the feeling were the same thing. I am 68 years old, and I have made a lot of mistakes, and I have also, in some important moments, done exactly the right thing. That Saturday in my kitchen with flour on the counter and 2 children climbing the chairs, I understood that the quiet months had been worth every one of them. Some things you build slowly, over years, and they only show their full shape when someone tries to take them apart and finds that they can't.